Why don't you do it? Why don't you do it? She said that was the question that changed her life forever. That was the question that became the foundation of her call. That was the question that pursued her entire long life. Why don't you do it? There were 3 sisters, Elizabeth, Katharine, and Louisa. They were wealthy, attractive, well known in their community for their generous and outgoing personalities. They were well-traveled, well-read, intellectuals who could have great conversations, as well as great fun with their family and their friends. These are not 3 characters from a Netflix special or series. They are not 3 personalities from a reality TV show, although some of the episodes of their life would make for good TV viewing. No, Elizabeth, Katharine, and Louisa Drexel were from Philadelphia. Their father was a very famous investment banker in that city, Francis Anthony Drexel. If you've ever been to Philadelphia, if you've ever heard of Philadelphia, if you've lived in Philadelphia, the name Drexel, you can't escape it. Now, Katharine Drexel was the second of these 3 sisters to be born. She was born right before the beginning of the Civil War in 1858, and her mother died just a few weeks after she was born, which meant that Elizabeth and Katharine very briefly went to live with an aunt and an uncle. And then their father Francis married a woman named Emma, and that's when they had the daughter Louisa. So Louisa, Katharine, Elizabeth were very strong in their bond with one another. They were offered many opportunities as people of privilege and wealth. They had private tutors. Their father wanted them to know geography, so he took them on trips throughout the entire United States. But the family was also a devoutly Catholic family, and they took seriously their obligation to live that faith. And so their mother and father would have, I think it was once a week, the house would be opened up, and anybody who was in need could come to their house and could come to them and receive the food, the clothing, and sometimes the monetary assistance that they needed. They wanted their children, the mother and father did, they wanted their daughters to understand that service is not just about writing a check. It's not about checking off a box. They wanted their daughters to see the people that they were serving, to see the people that would be the beneficiaries of their service. And it was important that they have an opportunity, these 3 women, to treat these folks with kindness and with respect. It was Emma Drexel, their mom, who kept teaching them about the dignity of the people who needed help. She insisted, kindness may be unkind if it leaves behind a sting. When their mother Emma became sick with cancer and she then subsequently died, it was Katharine who took care of her. And in those times of caring for her mother, Katharine came to realize that all the privilege and all the wealth that they had could not spare the Drexel family from the pain of suffering and death. And it also instilled in her a greater devotion to her faith and to the Eucharist. Now, Katharine liked to read. She read about the plight of Native Americans. She actually went out there at one point in a family trip in which she saw firsthand the struggles, the hardships, and the poverty of the Native American. And she also, in her own backyard in Philadelphia, she saw the struggle and the hardships and the poverty of those who were African American. Katharine was appalled by what she had read and appalled by what she had seen. As a white woman and as a devout Roman Catholic, Katharine Drexel saw how these struggles and hardships and poverty were caused by injustice. When Mr. Drexel died, he left a fortune to his 3 daughters. That fortune today would be the equivalent of $440 million. $440 million. Now, 2 years after their father died, the sisters traveled to Rome. It was 1887, and they had a private audience with Leo XIII. Catherine, in speaking with the Pope, talked about the struggle of the African American and of the Native American in the United States, and she begged the Holy Father, Leo XIII, to please send missionaries to our country to help them, to assist them, to educate them, to help them find a better life and get the things that they are due as basic human needs. It was that moment that Leo XIII looked at her and said, "Why don't you do it? Why don't you do it? Why don't you become the missionary? Why don't you form the religious order to do the things that you believe God is calling the church to do at this time?" Now, Catherine had long considered marriage, but she also had considered a discernment of religious life, and she had a spiritual director, and she decided after a period of time that she would form a religious order whose work would be to serve the needs of the Native and the African American communities. In preparation, she spent about a year and a half with the Sisters of Mercy to be formed as a religious woman. When word got out about her intentions in Philadelphia, the local paper carried the headline that read, "Miss Drexel enters a Catholic convent, gives up $7 million. In February of 1891, Katharine Drexel and 13 other women professed their first vows in the newly formed religious order called the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament. Katharine Drexel wanted the Blessed Sacrament to be the thing that gave them the courage, the strength, the desire to serve as Jesus did. As her community flourished, so did the passion for the needs of those who were neglected by the society from which she came. Her order would eventually establish 145 missions and 50 schools. One of the most famous is Xavier University in New Orleans. It's the first Catholic university for African Americans. And back in 1915, she saw some land in New Orleans that she was going to purchase to begin this university. And actually, the building that she was purchasing had been a school. And she used an independent agent who acted on her behalf to purchase this school for the beginning of the university. It was only after the purchase that was completed that people in the area realized it was a nun who had actually bought this and that it was going to be a school for African Americans. That night, every single window in that school was broken, was smashed by vandals. There would be other places in her life that she would confront the KKK, that she would work to get around laws that prevented her from establishing schools, from educating those who deserved to be educated. Katharine Drexel died in 1955. Think about it. She had lived through the Civil War, the First World War, the Second World War, the Cold War, and she was now leaving this life as the civil rights movement was really beginning to take shape in this country. You think about what she saw and what she experienced. When she was canonized in the year 2000, the Vatican said there were several things about her life that spoke to Catholics in our own time. One of them was her great devotion for the Eucharist, not just simply as a devotion, but really the thing that encouraged her to work for the unity of all peoples. The great sacrament of unity encouraged her to go out and unite people as brothers and sisters, irrespective of their backgrounds or their economic abilities. They also pointed out the courage and initiative that she had in addressing social inequality among minorities 100 years before such concern aroused public interest in the United States. To think that she was one of the first women of privilege, of a white woman who saw this, and long before it became something in all the papers, it was something that she saw in her heart that needed to be changed. They also pointed out her belief that education should be for everyone, and there should be equal access to that education. And they also pointed out her selfless service, giving not only the fortune that she had inherited, but every part of who she was to those who were victims of injustice. I think that her voice today would be a very challenging one for many of us. She would point out that many of us enjoy privileges that others do not have access to. Many of us enjoy privileges that we didn't technically earn, and maybe in some cases we don't deserve at all, or maybe don't deserve as much as others do. This is not about feeling guilty. It's not about saying that I don't deserve what I've worked hard for. No, it's a rather thinking about the words of Jesus in Luke's Gospel. These are words that really challenged Mother Katherine Drexel, that much will be required of the person entrusted with much. Think about that as a real call that she experienced. I think one that she would challenge us to embrace as well, that much more will be required of the person entrusted with much. Her voice would tell us today, be generous. And our generosity may look different. For some of us, it's a matter of time. Others, it's a matter of talent. And for still others, it's a matter of treasure. But to ask ourselves, what does it mean for me to be generous in helping those who are most in need? Her voice would also caution us. It is not enough simply to write a check or to drop off a bag of groceries somewhere or leave clothing in a charity bin. As important as all those things are, she would never want us to say that that kind of service is enough if we have not made contact with people who are struggling, with the hungry, with the poor, with those who are in need, so that as she did, we could see them face to face and know their stories and see them as brothers and sisters. Katharine Drexel once wrote, I think the words that are our challenge for our time, they are what her voice would say to us in these days. She said, the spirit of the Eucharist consists in the donation of one's own being. So, get up after receiving Holy Community and go find him in the people. Everything you do for the people, you do for him.